Hello and welcome to this series on biochemistry. I'm Dr. Donna Perigin, and in this series I'll be discussing select topics from the Cengage book on biochemistry written by Reginald Garrett and Charles Grisham. In this first chapter, the topic is basically the structure of life. So what makes up life and how chemistry supports life itself, how chemical systems are the basic building blocks of life. So this is the facts of life. Chemistry is the logic of biological phenomena. So everything, even cells, can be broken down into their respective molecular systems. And we're going to look at some single cell systems such as sperm and egg later on in this chapter. But American physicist Richard Feynman said, everything that living things do can be understood in terms of the jigglings and wigglings of atoms. So despite the spectacular diversity of life, the elaborate structure of biological molecules, and the complexity of vital mechanisms, our life functions ultimately interpretable in chemical terms. That's the big question. That's the essential question, and that's what we're going to answer in this course in biochemistry. We're going to answer how life functions are basically able to be broken down into chemical systems. So we're going to answer these key questions in this chapter. What are the distinctive properties of living systems? What kinds of molecules are biomolecules? What is the structural organization of complex biomolecules, or some of them? How do the properties of biomolecules reflect their fitness to the living condition? What is the organization and structure of cells? And what are viruses? So living things are actually composed of lifeless molecules, said a famous biochemist, Albert Leninger. And chemistry is the logic of biological phenomena, according to the authors of this book, Garrett and Grisham. But it's very true. Chemistry is the basis for all biological phenomena. So organisms are complicated and highly organized. Biological structures serve functional purposes, and those functional purposes support living systems. The biological structures are organized into living systems. Living systems are actually actively engaged in energy transformations, and we're going to look at in this chapter some molecules that help effect those transformations. And living systems have a remarkable capacity for self-replication. So these are all distinctive properties of living systems. They have self-replication, they engage in energy transfer, their biological structures serve functional purposes, and all living organisms are complicated and highly organized. So here's an example of some complicated, highly organized living organisms, such as a baboon and an orchid. So here we have the food pyramid in the sense of how sunlight transfers energy into food here on Earth. So we have photosynthesis as the basis of that pyramid, supporting plant life, and herbivores eat that plant life, and then carnivores consume the herbivores. And so this is how the food pyramid is, or the food chains are laid out here on Earth. And so this is the basis of how energy is transferred among organisms on Earth. All organisms essentially get their energy from the sun, which provides energy to plants to make food that the herbivores eat, and then the carnivores eat the herbivores. So we're going to look later on in this course at energy transfer specifically, and we're going to see different methods to effect that transfer in biological systems. But this is one molecule that helps transfer energy in biological systems. This is ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. And this, we're going to look later on at how this helps in energy transfer. But here we have an adenine moiety. We have ribose ring here, sugar ring, and then we have a triphosphate group. And so this molecule is made of all of these parts. Don't worry too much about that right now. We're just getting started in this course. This is just an example of a molecule that can be used to transfer energy. Here's another such molecule. We have NADPH, which is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. And so again, we'll look at this molecule in more depth later in this course or maybe next semester. But for right now, just realize there are molecules that affect energy transfer in living systems, and this is one of those molecules. Living systems also, they replicate themselves. They reproduce. And so living systems reproduce and cells reproduce through DNA replication. And so that fidelity of that replication is determined by the chemical nature of DNA. And so here we have a DNA double helix. We have two complementary strands of DNA, and you can see the backbone in the helical backbone, and then we also have the base pairs that are paired up. And you learned all of this in biology, and so I'm not going to go into a whole lot of that, but we're going to talk about this more later on in this course, and we're going to talk about replication. Okay, so one thing I do want to talk about here is covalent bonding. I know you learned this in general chemistry, you learned this in organic chemistry, and it's very important that you understand covalent bonding is the sharing of electron pairs. You should be familiar, you should be able to at least recognize the types of bonds that we had in these structures that we talked about earlier. So, you know, double bonds, single bonds, and how these atoms are actually bonded to each other, those bonding patterns. And so you really should be familiar with bonding patterns, such as, you know, hydrogen forms one bond, carbon forms four, and nitrogen tends to form three bonds and have a lone pair. Oxygen is divalent. You should go back and review all of those bonding patterns if you aren't already intimately familiar with them. Study this chart. That's what this is for, to help you remember those. This is a prerequisite for this course. You should already be familiar with all of those. But please be familiar with those bonding patterns and be familiar with the structures, because we're going to be talking about very complex structures in this course. And so you should really be familiar with basic bonding patterns and, you know, how those help build up larger, more complex structures, because we're going to be discussing those later in this course. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.